Do numbers carry repeated symbolic meaning across cultures? Now, today, in terms of numerology, this video is going to be focusing on a few numbers. And there are some things that inspired me. There was this understanding in modern astrology of the 22nd degree and the 8th degree being something like oh, it's really bad, And I wanted to explore that more. And upon exploring that, I came across a few other ideologies that kind of fit the full circle as to why degrees, even in astrology, have been broken down in a way that allows you to understand the sky better and understand what it's trying to tell you. Now, first, I want to address the idea of, I'm going to use the word plagiarism, or use the word inspiration. Plagiarism versus inspiration, let's just say. And let's say that anytime in research, even for myself, if I see something that is inspirational, I see writing that is, I think, oh, this is a good, bulk of text. Some people will have references as to how they got to what they got to. And as you go further back in time, there's less of that kind of reference structure that takes place. And so it gets more exciting to see where these ideas come from. And so today, I'm doing this to understand numbers in its raw sense. Not numerology like, oh, let's go online, check for life path number 3 or whatever. Because you're going to get a copy and paste rhetoric of just the same thing over and over again. And what we want to do is that when we're able to understand numbers, even just around us, we can have a format to say, okay, I know 3 means this. I know 1 means this. Because now if we learn it in an expressive sense, or if we kind of create character for the numbers, it's easier to remember. And this is what cultures have been doing across time. They create stories or they create symbols. The first thing that we're going to talk about today is Pickatrix. So speaking of symbols, Pickatrix use what is called a talisman. Now, what's a talisman? A talisman is something that allows you to gain a certain level of dominion and control. And it's once that's done, a talisman on its own is just a talisman, just like the evil eye, right? Talisman. And it has been charged in a way to protect you or to invoke something. And I found this very interesting on this numerological dive. And also for myself, because even how numbers have repeated to me in my life, it starts to make sense that there's a story being told. And it starts to make sense that as we go on in our lives, a lot of things become vague. And I'm going to talk about vagueness when it comes to Pickatrix. But then after a while, you go through a process where it just illuminates itself. So Pickatrix, if you ever have time, and if you want me to, I can put it in the description link because it's on archive.org. And it's talking about, it does reference the sky, and it references the energy around the earth itself that hold this frequency, this energy of zodiac symbology. It's like it's saying it's wrapped around the earth, right? And there's some things that are going to be vague in the text, the text of the Pickatrix. And they say, hey, some things are just intuition. And I feel like even across time, numbers can be vague. Numbers on the first layer can just be that 1 + 1 is 2, 2 + 2 is 4, and so on. But when we start to see with an emphasis or energy, sometimes it's through lived experience. Sometimes it's just through I guess just, yeah, I think it's lived experience. And so, Pickatrix, the sky is seen as mathematical. And each degree carries a quality. And that quality is timing that opens opportunity or portals. So if you make a talisman, which is is separate but part of the connection to do this practice, which I mean, I haven't looked to see if it works or anything, but I enjoy the idea that the degree system has been incorporated to create a new way of looking or understanding the timings of the sky. If you make a talisman, you must add incense, and then you capture that quality, and that intention goes to where you wish for it to go. Now, this is, I guess, in a way how manifestation works, but they've used maths and degrees and angles in the sky to use entrainment, which I find very interesting. And it's very different from modern astrology, where you've got the degree system. It's looking at how it has conditions that is already understood. So a certain degree, they will say, this is the degree that you can release, I don't know, you can get good fortune, or you can release baggage, or you can do whatever. And so what you do, because that's already been understood, you then align to that degree, and then you use your talisman and your incense and your blah, right? Back in the day, everyone was a bit magical, okay? But my point here that I'm trying to drive home is that how each number, even the zodiac signs that are associated with it, have the same energy. And so what that's going to help with understanding numbers without, Googling, what's life past this and what's life past that, is its raw state. So like I said earlier, when it comes to plagiarism versus inspiration, when you go through that process, if you get inspired by somebody's work, you have to say, okay, what were they inspired by? And then you get inspired by their core work, or what they were already inspired by. And so you have a new set of information. And that's a more kind of traditional way of being, I guess, a researcher. And I think I'm saying that to say, and just really drive home, like, this idea of understanding numbers for yourself in a personal way. And I say that because there was a lady recently, I think it was on my previous numerology video, and she was like, oh, when I've been trying to avoid the video or something, and it keeps coming up in my algorithm, but like I saw, I hope she's okay with me saying this, but it's a public comment. I saw 666 on the view count, and so I just need time to really think about what's happening. So firstly, I was just like, it depends on where she's mentally at when she understands the number 666, and we're gonna cover that for sure. But it kind of seems like you might be questionable, and I might need some time to think about the message that you were giving. You know what I mean? Actually, it might not be my numerology video. It might be my astrosociology video. But we are going to explore 666. We're going to explore the number 6 quite a lot through these series, so that it really kind of just sinks in to break free from why people think these things about this number in the first place. Again, there is inspiration and there's plagiarism. And I'm not stating that there's plagiarism, but in terms of understanding the root of where all inspiration comes from, when you get there, then you can have your own personal inspiration, your own personal understanding of things. Because why not? Why not? And so Let's have a read. The understanding is, if something interferes or intervenes in our life, we know patterns, people, places, and things. And this is why something like the Pickatrix has been formed. And the Pickatrix has adopted some, or the ideas, or the lunar captures of the sky from Vedic astrology, and has kind of made their own thing based on what they know mathematically in the sky and what kind of outcomes they've experienced through time when it comes to numbers or degrees. So even that is inspiration to understand. Now, again with Pickatrix, they see a talisman is a spirit within a body. And then the meaning of that is its intention is to be encoded in material form. Like, again, we have the evil eye, for example. The idea is that it's charged up, that it's embodied. And this is cultural. Everybody's got different ideas about how talismans work or how they fit. And this is why even in Christianity, where they say, oh, this demonic. And again, we're going to talk about this demonization, in a way, weaponry that has been used for administrative purposes, darling. And again, this is more just understanding where the root of everything comes from, so you can have a better, I think it's fair. It'd be fair, right? If you just woke up and then someone just told you, hey, this is an orange and really it's an apple. And then all your life, someone's telling you something is an orange and you can stand 10 toes down. I know this is orange because I've been told this. But then you say, no, actually, let me tell you a story. And then someone tells you a story about the beginnings. And then you need to have some time to reflect. You need some time to think about, okay, one, why have I been deceived in such a way? Two, can I move out of my frustration and see this as a way of exploration and knowledge and learning new things? And then you just move forward and then you start opening up, right? It's not a closed experience when it comes to life, that you can be more open, right? Just like that lady. She was like, look, I need to just think. I just saw 66 on the thing. And I'm not sure what's going on here. And that is perfectly fine. And I think it's wonderful. It's a wonderful process when your mind, that kind of battle with the mind. And it's not often that we want to get into that space, but when you do and you release yourself from it, it's the most liberating thing. And again, there's nothing evil or nothing, it just is, if you can unlearn something, why not? And here, all I'm doing is just giving information, and then we can work through or conclude what numbers are telling us across cultures. And I'm just picking a few things to depict that. So a talisman in Arabic is talsam. When talsam is reversed, you get mauslat, which is dominion and control. In this case, using numerical ratios, placing astrological secrets in certain bodies at appropriate times, using powerful incenses capable of bringing the spirit of that talisman. That's chapter 2, Pickatrix, page 11. So if you want to read more on that, feel free, because it's interesting. This is what people are doing. And it's an old book, so maybe people are not doing it, but it's interesting, right? Now, I want to look at Aries, and I want to look at the actionable numbers that hang around Aries, and how we can look at that planetarily, and how we can look at that numerically, and also just what other esoteric knowledge has kind of coincided with Aries energy or the numbers around it, or this idea of something imminent happening, or something, you know, oh my gosh, what's gonna, you know, I want to look into that. I want to look into that feeling, because there's a lot of that feeling right now. There's a lot of tension. If you think of Mars and it has its 2 moons, right? It's about fear, right? It's about, there's all this other stuff. And the more we can uncover what this is about and what Aries is really shown in its raw sense, then we can have more sovereign over our feelings, rather than someone telling us, hey, this is how you're going to feel on this day of this month. And like, no, you're not telling me how I feel. I tell myself how I feel. Do you follow me? So, right, we have papyrus. Moving on. Why am I speaking about papyrus? Now, papyrus is a, I guess, paper in a way. That was used for the kings and queens. It's not just your regular folk out here. Okay, it's special paper. And sometimes this paper, even the paper itself, was seen, once you even put pen to that paper, it becomes some sort of magic, I guess. And I speak about papyrus because this is where the sacred texts were written on, across the lands, across all the kingdoms, all right? And of course, this idea of writing things down was something that was introduced. And then once one kingdom introduced it, then another kingdom, and so on and so on. And I really want to drive that home about this kind of idea of influence across the lands. Sacred text is operational. What do I mean by that? An operation is to put something through. It's part of a bigger agenda, I guess. Don't know if that word, maybe it doesn't matter. Use the word already. So, when we think of ancient texts like the Bible or the Quran or whatever ancient text, Bhagavad Gita, like there are orders and there are understandings. Oh, that kingdom is doing this. Okay. So how their congregation reacting to that? How is that working for them? Oh, that works. Okay. Oh, I want that. I want to do that so that I can control my congregation as well. Let it be done. And so when you put sacred texts together, you're also having the understanding of the cultural elements of that particular congregation. And you're also saying, what do you also want to drive home? What idea do you want to put? So this is why I find it interesting when we have this idea of missionaries, right? It depends on how far you understand missionaries. But the missionaries went across the lands, and we can say even missionaries and papyrus paper is an extension of political power. That's where we start using the word political. So now if we're reading texts like the Bible, for example, this was initially made for the kings and the queens. Why? Because they understood that this creates good control. Is this bad or good? No, it's just, of course, if you have a group of people, you want to have a level of control. Can it go out of hand? I mean, history has showed that. But ultimately, what I'm saying is, like, just like we see a movie, sometimes the movie can be in third person, or sometimes it can have a narrator, or sometimes it could be in first person, right? And what I'm saying is, if we think about the lens that in which it was supposed to be read, that book was supposed to be for kings and queens, those of a higher echelon. So when they're reading things like, I'm going to use the term 666, it says calculate it. So if they're talking about calculations, it means that 666 is not a number that you just look at and then you become fearful. Imagine yourself as a king or a queen. What understanding would they get from that in translation? Beware of the beast. That is 636. Even Erica Badu said it. Yeah, you may laugh, but you did not do your math. You have to calculate. And sometimes it comes with vagueness and it must be intuited. But where did you get your fear from when it comes to this number? And is this part of the political power? Which is fantastic, because that political power is if anything, is underground. It doesn't exist. But yet some people are still shook by that. That's how brilliant this whole system is. I have to say, like, the kings and queens they did the job. And so, how I've understood it anyway, if I was a king or a queen and I'm seeing that particular message, to be mindful of the 666, I would see, because I understand 6, something is something that is in process, right? It's almost like a pregnancy. It's something that you don't know what to expect. Is it a boy? Is it a girl? Well, don't know. It's unpredictable. In a way, we can say it's a little bit unstable because we don't know what the outcome could be. And that could be, we can consider that as a threat. Now, we know in this day and age, when kings and queens or kingdoms, they don't like threats to their land. And so, if I was a king or queen and I saw that, I'd probably akin it to, okay, that could be a neighboring kingdom or a neighboring space that has, that I might need to keep an eye on. And should I see that happen 3 times, this number 6 happen 3 times in my kingdomship, I might have to kind of roll up my sleeve and say, we might have to give him the old 1 2. Do you follow me? And so if we're seeing this as admin or operations, we have a little bit more softness about the book in itself, what it's for. Even like Henry VIII. As I'm winning 1 to 2, he's like, I wanna divorce my wives. Well, change it up. What do you need to do? So if it's that readily available to change it in those times, then we have to be a bit softer with ourselves when we come to maybe what our fears are when it comes to certain numbers or how we're understanding numbers. And then have more sovereign. And this is why I've decided to go to scrape everything down to its very root, so that you can have sovereign over how you see things. And so you don't have someone telling you, oh, this day, this is going to happen and you should be this and you should be, No, do it yourself. Have sovereign over your own self, over your own vessel. Because perhaps arguably this political or these sacred texts have had a lot of sovereignty over your self. And it's redundant now. It's almost like it was, I don't even know, something that was like an infrastructure, like scaffolding, and the scaffolding is taken away, but we still have the mentality that the scaffolding is still there. So again, it's not good or bad. It's just timing. And so I decided to use some numbers that come in text to kind of further drive home this idea of operational systems in sacred text. Now, in Rome was very military based. Okay, everything's about war. Everything is very Aries, very Martian. And so they had measures or metrics or to measure quantity. They had certain terms. The term that they would use for something of a huge magnitude, they would call a legion. Biblically, when we look at the understanding of legion, they use the term legion, 12 legions, which would come up approximately around 72,000. So this idea of it's not literal, but it's more about expressing how expansive the angels were. And this is just one term, because I think even in other texts it talks about 100,000 or something like this. I think it was Daniel or something. So if there's this understanding where the numbers are more symbolic in these texts as opposed to literal, then we are scraping back again. Oh, okay. So, all right. So you just want to express magnitude. You want to express greatness. There's so many. Okay, got it. Now, because their cultural term is legion, that's not going to be the same or translate the same way in another culture. So more Semitic or Islamic terms, culturally, they like odd numbers. So in the Hadith, you have also a similar interpretation of the quantity of angels. Hey, there's about 70,000 angels. That's a lot. That's a lot of angels. And this is not just isolated literature. But the terms that, because I was starting to think, well, there seems to be quantifying in the same way. I think maybe if maybe another culture had, I don't know, 100,000 angels or 88,000 angels, but they all have the same numbers. So there is almost a sense of different cultures, same technique. So kingdoms possibly are adopting ideas from one another to create control and order. And this is even much like if we want to talk about Jesus, and we want to talk about the fact that in his Islamic understanding, there is this, no, Jesus is the Messiah. And probably in other countries, let's say in like West Africa or Yoruba cosmology, they completely like not obliterate, but the idea of it was that the existing spiritual deities were no longer able to even be fused into the Bible. It was transliterated. So when you have Jesus, you have Jesu, who could have been, and in God would have been Olodumare, but like, I don't believe they literally demonized the whole African or the Yoruba cosmology and said you can't, because I believe Jesu would be Odu, but they said we don't want that name. We want you to have Jesu, right? So we're branding and we're doing up things, right? Transliteration literally means to give it the sound and feel of the name. This is why when we think of Yeshua and its Hebrew understanding, which would have typically meant Joshua, but again, sorry, we want the word Jesus. This is what we're doing, everybody. Get with the program, okay? Stick with it. And so people did. Why? What are these missionaries doing? Now, when we understand, when somebody has a project brief, the project brief is, okay, we're going to look at some land, and okay, we see Egypt is connected here, and we know that if we have some ties with Egypt or some level of control, or if we cause some sort of mayhem, yeah, we're going to first bring the missionaries just to say, look, we just want to talk to you real quick, okay? We're just going to tell you this is what could potentially happen, but that won't happen if you bring in this book, if you do X, Y, Z, X, Y, Z. And they say, you know what? I don't even like what you're doing. Now, some people, the pushback is going to be a lot. And some people don't push back. Or some people, like Ethiopia, they were okay because they already had a format that fitted with what they already, with the agenda. It was complementary in a way. Whereas other ones were just so far left. And you're thinking to yourself, well, you know, maybe you go to parts of India, or you go parts of maybe China, and they still have their own traditions. It hasn't been touched. But it's almost like the project brief has, depending on how close they are to certain areas, I've marked these as these like red hatchings as seas between the lands. Now, wherever those lands and sea meet, the missionary is going to have a nice conversation with you. Like, hey there, yeah, have you heard about us? Yeah, let's come and talk to you real quick. We wanna tell you something, just real quick. And it's whether you agree or you don't agree. So with this idea of how things in terms of sacred text, in terms of operation to create an order worldwide, most of these lands are either heavily Islamic or heavily Christian. And to be fair, at this point, I don't even think, when I'm looking at these, this is Islamic. If there are Christians, it's very small. It's not even. But the idea, and this is where it gets interesting, right? Because if we're thinking of the Semitic culture, which are a lot of the Arabic culture, and we're thinking of the 666, right? And we're thinking about kings and queens having a book and it says, beware. This is just when you're looking at text, I mean, you're looking at numbers and what those numbers are telling, I guess, the system or telling people. Beware. So let's look some more at the numbers. I said I wanted to highlight 6, 13, 22, 0. I might do more, but that's what I've kind of chose. Now, kings and queens. Now, we spoke about the possibly alert system when it comes to the number 6 or 3 sixes. But what about if in the congregation, there are people that are ascending in the land? Now, remember, everything is about control and power. So if you have enough influence, which I talk a lot about through my videos, yeah, about influence. And we now have what we call an influencer, just straight and direct. That's what we're doing. So if you have a congregation of people and a few people start becoming a 6, maybe, or threat to the system, to the order, that's going to be notified. Someone's going to see that. Hey, this person on the North Coast, a lot of people are listening to what they're having to say. Check them out. What's going on with them? Check them out. And how controllers worked, it's like, okay, well, we'll give you a knighthood. We see you doing great things. Well, we want to make sure that it's controlled, it's contained. But the idea of 666 is, well, or the number 6, let's just use that there, or the expression of 6, is that you don't know what is going to be birthed. So you have to keep an eye on it. Good or bad can come from, I guess, a certain level of ascension. And I'm going to say ascension because numbers express themselves in a way that you can see how numbers are expressed through time. when we think of the base code of 0 and 1s, and that's all numbers are made up of, and then people have kind of used glyphs or symbols, and over time we've got the current numeric system, which looks like this. If we scrape back again and say, what were they saying before? I could have gone further back, but hey, let's just keep it to Roman numerals, right? Because, you know, everything kind of does link back to Rome when you think about it. So what do we have, right? We have a series of ones, and we have a tally, right? Like I said, in Rome, they're very military based, they're very operational. So they're doing tallies and measurements for lands, taxes, all these kind of things. And it's to oversee, to make sure everything is in order. And everything gets contained in a group of 5. Now, 5 is what they would say is like an opened hand. And that open hand contains 1, 2, 3, and 4. So what happens when we come to 6? I'd like to imagine it like a wine glass. 1, 2, 3, and 4 is, I don't know, the quantity of marbles, let's say. But then the 5th or the 6th, sorry, can't fit inside the 5, and it has to drop out. This is where you have V1, which equals 6. This is 5 plus 1. Whereas before, it was just singular numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then this is the change. This is like the stop sign, right? This is the protection, this is the boundary, this is the threshold. And what's interesting symbolically, if we look at 5 and Saturn's, I guess, glyph or symbol, it looks like a 5. So it has these kind of similarities or strengths. If we see a 5 as a series of 1s and 0s, or maybe half a 0, we're looking at what is being expressed here. And then if 5 is like, I guess, the equivalent of Saturn in that sense, and how 5 is translated across time and what kind of resonance that's having across cultures, we still see a repeated pattern about how we understand numbers across time. And so it would say that if we're thinking of 6, or even if we're thinking about this dreaded, I don't know why it's dreaded, but I guess now it's become cultural again, that we're like afraid of the number 13. And when you go back and you say, why? And then the Knights Templar comes up, and then they died on the 13th, and that's why they say, yeah, that day we don't do nothing on that day. We don't even want to build a building on that day. We don't want none of it. And okay, but again, I think it's given vagueness, ladies and gentlemen. And so even with the idea of 13, when we're looking at it from even the tarot, right? It comes under the death card. It comes under Pluto. It comes under Scorpio. It comes under Mars. Because it has so many different resonances, and Mars and Scorpios are interchangeable depending on the time, even astrologically, right? So this idea of action and death, or action and endings, is something that plays out in the numbers. 1 plus 3 is 4, which 4 is about. It's similar to 5, but it's more to do with law and structure. Where 5 is more about structure and thresholds. And what do I mean by thresholds? We can see a threshold like a door. We can see a threshold like the number or 0. Because 0 is a portal. 0 is a binary 0 and 1. 0 is what you initiate Mars with, or you initiate the 1 with, to create more numbers. And so here we have, after 5, you reach a certain frequency that is very different. This is containable, right? 1 to 3, which normally they just say, okay, this is containable, or 1 to 4. But the minute someone sparks up and becomes a 6, this becomes, oh, what's going on over there? What's happening? Why is there so many people listening to this person? What's going on? We need to make sure. So now we have X. So those are the only changes, which is V in reflection, I guess, to make X, which is 10, which is another threshold, but another threshold to go even higher, because then now this expresses itself as this number, understanding that there are more numbers than this that has to be expressed themselves larger, and we can't just keep using ones all the time. So how do we understand this in our own lives, or how do we understand it when we see numbers day to day? If we understand 5 is kind of like Saturnian, and we understand 4 is law and structure. If you're here, right, I don't even know what kind of people would be here or how you would define them. We would say these people are unpredictable, right? Unpredictable. All right, so you keep an eye on that one. But 4 is probably a person, they're doing the right thing, they're living their life, and they're just following the rules. You know, they're not a rule breaker, right? They're just very whatever. And they're probably doing quite well for themselves because they've stuck to the rules. And maybe even in terms of the rules work with them or work for them quite well. So they have no real need to really do too much. They're very happy being here, just at a good point. Now, 5 is about seeking more from 4. And then sometimes when you seek too much, you get here. And it goes and it goes and it goes. And this is where, I guess, when we start talking about life path numbers, or even our names adding up to a number that holds a frequency or tells a story about who we are, then we can start exploring, like, why do we have whatever, like, you know, certain house numbers, or certain college ID numbers, or why certain people are coded under certain ethnicities, blah, blah, blah. Why are these numbers? And we'll talk about that in other videos. But then you start to see, but I really wanted to talk about this now so that when we go forward, we understand how these numbers are expressed over time. Even in ancient texts, they use similar formats of numbers that are mixed in with culture, but also mixed with a prime understanding or a raw understanding about what that number means. Why is let's say, Rome so obsessed with the number 6, or why they're so obsessed with the number 5, or specific numbers are assigned to certain cultures, and because they like the resonance of that number. It reflects who they are, right? So if odd numbers reflect more the Semitic culture, and more, I guess 6s reflect more Roman culture, because it's balanced, it's equal. If we see, even in astrology, it has to be equal. 12, we can divide that down. It's about system. It's about, what do you mean? What do you mean? Because, like, even with the Nakshatras, which is the Vedic understanding of how we look at the lunar positions, whereas astrologically we're looking at more solar. It depends on which system you're using, but, like, just to explain that they use they have a degree which is 13 degrees each time. That would drive the culture of the Romans insane, because it's not an equal number. What do you mean you're using 13? No, we're going to use 12. So some things are just about when you think about the ancient times, when you think about the level of detail they put in their buildings, When we go there on holiday or we go to places or ancient buildings, and you see how much detail, it was more about how beautiful can we make something. Even if we have to painstakingly add all these little pieces of glass to the ceiling, I know that nobody else is going to have this. And we're going to be the only one in our kingdom that has gone this far in the human experience to create something like this. We're never creating buildings like that ever again. Nobody has that level of dedication to craftsmanship in the way that they did back then. So when we think about stylized, where we want to have, do we want to have 30 degrees? Do we want to have 12 degrees? Do we have 13? When we see someone putting 13, they're not looking about aesthetics. They're like, no, this is what the lunar positions are doing. They're just taking on the facts. Whereas Rome was more like about deification. No, you have to use the word Jesus. So if you need to change it to whatever, it still needs to be that name. Put it how you need to, but it still needs to be. And some countries or some cultures, so let's say, I found it interesting that the Islamic tradition wasn't, I wouldn't use the word bullied, but they were able to say, we're going to use that name and call him Isa. But we can't, geographically, we can't use that name. It's too close to home, which is very interesting. Geographically, it's too close to the story that is to control so many people in a certain way. We can't use that. We will collapse the whole, this system that you want to bring in because you want to try and do whatever. We can't do it. So in a way, when you think about systems and order, that's one thing that the Romans lived by. They lived by numbers, tallies, charts, taxes, all that kind of stuff. They to the T. But sometimes certain perfections in life, as we know, nature is not perfect. Nature has little wiggles and bends. And so even sometimes when you are that perfect, or you try to be, it creates beautiful outcomes to a degree. And so when we're speaking about numbers, or we're speaking about degrees, which we're going to compare Pickatrix, the Vedic and modern astrology, and see where the overlaps are. And I've just chosen Aries because we're speaking about Romans, blah, 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 right? So how does numbers express itself over time? So I wanted to do this, sometimes you can have magic maths or fun maths, right? So if we know that if we look at 44 times 2, and I know this is an easy equation, but I wanted to more show the systems, right? So we know 4 times 2 is 8, so that'd be 0 and 8. If you plus 0 and 8, because 0 is a portal, 0 is a threshold, doesn't matter what you do. 0 times 0 is 0. 0 plus 0 is 0. So 0 and 8 will still make 8. So that would be 88. Now, with this one, 4 times 3. And then you have 1 and 2. Then you add 1 and 2 to create 3. So with maths, there's different ways to make calculations to get your answer. And the reason why I was showing this was more to show its expressions. This is more symbolic, but this is more, I guess, in an ancient symbology when it comes to numbers, how the frequency of numbers expresses itself. Whether we're seeing, I'm seeing 333 on the clock, or I'm seeing 666 on the clock, they're just lesser expressions of what it is. So if we go even to here and we see 3 and we see 6, it's going to express itself in a lesser way. And so when we understand the frequencies of numbers, and even when you see 3, but on its own, but if you see 3 multiples of times, it's more condensed. And especially if you see something like 303, for example, this is more like a threshold. So this is more like a boundary in a way. How we see numbers, we can start to characterize them and start to see what it's telling us. And then when we do look at the interpretations of what numbers are, whether we're looking online at life path numbers, name numbers, soul urge, these things, we can start to have an added layer to where this is referenced in our lives. So overall, what I've kind of understood is that 1 would be considered as initiation, 2 would be considered as polarity, 3, interaction, 4, law and structure, 5, structure and thresholds, 6, craft and repetition, 7, intellect and disruption, 8, infinite flow, 9, completion and return, 0, reset or avoid. Now, I did look at, because even when I was thinking about the number 13, as I said earlier, and this kind of understanding of like, oh my gosh, like we can't use that number, it's bad luck. And actually it's not. Again, it's very cultural, right? If you've got some gripe, anything that's associated with that thing, you don't want to know parts of, right? So even when I thought of the Knights Templar and how it was symbolically, when you see the cross and how that is across time, these ideas have been borrowed and where it originates from and what people have used it for. Overall, the cross itself is about jurisdiction or protection. And tilted at an axis, it becomes an X, which has a different resonance to it as well, right? This is a transition or the collapse of a boundary. This is more like protection in motion in a way, or a vertex. And so across time, this symbology, even sometimes you could have the cross with even the circle around it, which has even another meaning to it. It's all of these symbols are to express this is who we are. This is what we're about. So whether you see in the ambulance at hospitals, it's showing you that there is a jurisdiction here. Like you cannot, whoever's trying to come here and try and cause any problems, you cannot cause problems here. Now this we can get further into this, but let's leave it at that. Then it's also understood that you divide the space in 4 directions. And we can see that you even divide the sky in 4 spaces, right? Which we have. And that could even be seen as a jurisdiction in itself. That there are certain conditions in the one part of the sky and another and another and another. So everything has everything kind of, there is a overlap. If we're going to say slightly overlapping, there's an overlap. Not fully, maybe a little bit, maybe like 30% overlap. And so let's have a look at Pickatrix, and we're looking at the degrees because more in the modern sense, when people, sometimes when I'm seeing on social media, I'm like, oh my gosh, look out for, this degree because this one, it represents this and it, this happened to this person. And it's like, I'm being, trying to be very sort of censored here, but like it's being very morbid. Yeah. And it doesn't need to be. It doesn't need to be, but there is something that drives home in terms of why these degrees bring about a certain hysteria or kind of gives like fear-based astrology. When really, if we scrape it back again, we understand that these degrees, even with Pickatrix, the late degrees of Aries were entrained to say, hey, look, if you need to travel, or you need to go somewhere or leave, or you want to get free your slaves, right? We're thinking about this is that period of time. Use this degree. And this is an Aries degree. Then as we go on, we've got between the degrees of 20 and 22, this is more of a later zone. You can't use this same energy, but it still holds this idea of which even Vedic and modern astrology says it's about intensities, endings. It's like what is done cannot be undone. Whatever you're doing in that time is whatever's going to be perpetuated going forward into the next. So when people talk about morbid narratives, why they're focused on that in particular when they can talk about, hey guys, you know what? This is a time where there's opportunity to whatever you're doing now. So whether you're going through cycles of getting rid of something or going through cycles of improving your well-being, this action is going to propel you into the next phase or after that date. Instead, there's fearmonger and all kinds of stuff, and it's very strange. I sometimes I just think like, are they being told to say this? You know, like, I don't know. But yes. Then you have so there's that. They do have slight overlaps. Pickatrix and Vedic are similar just because Pickatrix has taken from Vedic astrology to merge with the mathematical understanding of things, and then the addition of talismans and etc. It's kind of similar as like Jyotish, like where you use particular stones or whatever. So maybe they're interchangeable, but they're saying the same thing when it comes to Aries, when it comes to certain degrees in Aries. I've only just used the initial two, but there's like generally 3 degrees of Aries and the energy that comes from them. So late Aries could be seen as closure. Early Aries accelerates outcomes in terms of separation and release. And then mid Aries magnifies intent. So a lot of the time, if we look at all the narratives and we see where people have got their influence from, we can start to paint a better picture, because I think it's unfortunate, right? I can imagine these people are very intelligent, right? And this is why part of me just thinks like, are they being told to say these things? Because I'm like, you read, I don't know. So the intensity is, because it's very Martian, it can, you are kind of naturally driven to think about war, endings, death, this kind of stuff. But actually, there's something more, like the number 13, there's something more about renewal, rebirth, just like the death card. It's not about literal death, So it depends on where your head's at. It depends what your agenda is, okay? Depends what kind of political agenda you're on. But, I'm not on a political agenda, ladies and gentlemen. I'm just here to give some information. I put them all together and you make sense of what it is. I've given some sense, but you add your sense. You know what I mean? And so if we lastly look at how the sky is divided from the 12th house system to the 13th house system, we can see that the 27 nakshatras are divided by 360, but divided by 27. And this gives the degree of 1320, which is what they use to match the moves of the sky, because the moon moves 13 degrees a day, right? So that's always going to be a boundary. And it's kind of seeing more tracking things in real time. Whereas when we look at the modern aspects of it, we can say, okay, that's all Placidus, I guess. 360 divided by 12, and then we have 30 degrees, right? Sidereal. Then we have 30 degrees. So this is looking at solar motion, so it's resets and their boundaries at 30 degrees, or we can say is they're like 29, you know. And this is more symbolic time, because I guess more it's one of the same. Like even when I said in my tropical versus sidereal video, you're both looking at different frequencies of different things, where the chakras are looking more from the moon, which is about emotion. It's about your core self, right? Whereas this is more solar, more about the equinox. It's about seasons. So it's still how you're interacting, how your emotions are interacting, right? But yeah, so I hope that you have a different layered understanding about how we understand numbers, how we understand how numbers, even number equations, are expressed in itself, and how even when we're thinking of it from the numeric system, whether old or new, how that is expressed itself, and what those numbers tell us across time. And how even some texts that hold numbers, how they've expressed it through even sacred texts or older texts. And yeah, that's it. I think next week, I think I will go more into like contemporary numbers that we use repeatedly or we see, like 404 error codes. Like, what is that? Like, where is that coming from? That is not being a conspiracy, but it's numbers that we are in contact with all the time. And so when we start exploring the numbers that we're in contact with, we can start to see, we can start to match what the current resonance of these numbers are in relation to the numbers that we're interacting with all the time. So that's that. I hope you have enjoyed it, and I will see you soon. Take care.